Good afternoon. I am honored to be here. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Jay. I should say that you pronounced my name just perfectly. The other day, I introduced myself on the south side of Chicago. I said, "Hi, my name is Raja Krishnamoorthi." And the person said, "Roger Christian Murphy. Very nice to meet you." I didn't know the Irish made it to India. I want to thank Jay and Ed and the City Club for putting on today's wonderful luncheon. Can you give them a big round of applause? They're such a fabulous institution. And I want to thank all of you for taking precious time out of your busy schedules to be here today, including my lovely wife, Priya, who you were introduced to. I should tell you that Priya is an anesthesiologist, and the joke is that we both put people to sleep. So please brace yourselves, have a little extra caffeine before we get started. Now, I was sworn in on January 3rd. Almost 1 year ago. And Priya and I have 3 children, a 12, 8, and a 1-year-old. And the 8-year-old said to me on January 3rd, he said, "So today is your swearing-in day, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, it is." And then he said, "What bad words will you be saying today?" Today is not a day for bad words. It's a day for good words and words of gratitude from me to you for allowing me the privilege of being here today, and also words of reflection about this year that's just passed. It's been a tremendous privilege to be the Congressman for the 8th Congressional District of Illinois. These are the west and northwest suburbs of Chicago, basically all the suburbs west of O'Hare International Airport. And knowing that I'm fairly new to the job, I often get asked the question, what do I think about my fellow members of Congress and the institution itself? My answer, and I mean this sincerely, is that I've been really impressed by the individuals that I've met on both sides of the aisle who make up the current Congress, especially my freshman colleagues. Let me just tell you about a couple of them. For example, my friend Republican Don Bacon from Nebraska is a retired Air Force general before he came to Congress. Interestingly, he campaigned with a pig to drive home the message about his last name. That's a real true story. Another person I met was Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin. He's a Republican from Green Bay. He and I founded something called the Middle Class Jobs Caucus because although we disagree on certain issues, we agree that growing and strengthening the middle class is one of the basic essential items that should be on the agenda for Congress. His only irredeemable quality, of course, is that he's a Packers fan. I even gave some helpful advice to my fellow Democratic freshman colleague, Jamie Raskin, who's a constitutional law professor from Maryland. He's a very impressive fellow. I suggested that because of all the questions that he keeps getting asked about the Constitution this year, that he should dub his town hall meetings Askin' Raskin. To call it even, I said he could name my town halls as soon as he came up with something that rhymes with Krishnamoorthi. I believe many members of Congress, indeed the majority of members, are well-intentioned people who truly believe in our country and who are truly dedicated to serve their constituents. Unfortunately, that's not reflected, however, in the partisan dysfunction that often marks Congress. That said, today, I'd like to talk about how I'm trying to change that by bringing a little bit of bipartisan cooperation to 2 issues, one on the national level and then one near to home. On the national level, I sit on the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. And there I've had the opportunity to work on something I care deeply about, and that is workforce training. By reaching across the aisle on this committee, I've learned firsthand how important bipartisanship is for bringing policy into effect, and that sometimes it can even carry you all the way to rural Pennsylvania. I'll explain that last little bit in a short while. On the Education Committee, my main focus has been on a piece of bipartisan legislation to modernize our career, technical, and vocational education system. To give you some background on this legislation, I want to start by A, discussing the need to close the skills gap, B, where career and technical education stands today, and C, what I'm doing to address it. First, the skills gap. Our country faces a range of economic challenges, but one which doesn't receive enough attention is closing the skills gap. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are 6 million unfilled jobs in the workforce because employers cannot locate the skills or necessary knowledge in current workers. At the same time, almost 70% of Americans don't have a college degree, and this isn't going to change anytime soon. Only 65% of high school graduates go to college, and only 56% of them complete college. The question is, what do we do for non-college graduates who are willing to work hard and want to pursue their piece of the American dream? In our increasingly competitive and interconnected world, a 4-year college degree may not be for everyone, but a post-secondary education has to be. The best way to meet both challenges is by strengthening and updating our career, technical, and vocational education system. By improving these programs, which largely reside in high schools and community colleges, we can both prepare students for good-paying, family-sustaining jobs and help our economy grow by ensuring that employers have the workers they need. Now, it's summarized in a little anecdote that I heard the other day, and I just want to relate it to you. You see, there was this plumber who went to this attorney's house, and he did some work, and he handed the attorney the bill. The attorney took one look at the bill and said, "Oh my God, these hourly charges are higher than mine." And so then the plumber took one look at the attorney and one look at the bill and said, "You're right, those charges are higher than what I used to charge when I was an attorney." The story illustrates something that I think we know perhaps to be true in our gut, which is that we may need to right-size the skill set of our workforce. As a former attorney, I can say this, perhaps we have too many attorneys in our workforce and not enough cybersecurity experts. Maybe we have too many attorneys and not enough plumbers. Oh, you want to clap? Okay, that's good. Maybe we have not enough pharmacy technicians or solar panel installers or wind turbine repair people. The point is this: we have to do everything we can to close the skills gap by making sure that our talent, our rich human talent that's sitting on the bench, our workers and our young students get the skills to take the jobs that exist. And so, despite this skills gap, and despite the importance of career and technical education, unfortunately, Congress hasn't revisited the federal law that governs this system since 2006. This particular law is called the Perkins Career Technical Education Law, CTE for short. And Perkins CTE is the primary vehicle by which high schools and community colleges fund career, technical, and vocational education across the country. The bill that Congress passed 11 years ago was written for a pre-recession economy, where a college degree virtually guaranteed a job offer, and when automation had yet to transform the workplace. We need to update this law. While times have changed markedly in the past decade, our national vision for education in the career technical education space has remained static. So I introduced bipartisan legislation designed to better connect career and technical education with our rapidly changing economy. My partner in this effort is my good friend, Congressman Glenn G.T. Thompson, a Republican from rural Pennsylvania. Our bill, H.R. 2353, is also known as the Thompson-Krishnamoorthi Act, the longest title bill in Congress. Not because of the Thompson part. It does 4 things, folks. First, it moves federal authority for spending these dollars from Washington, D.C. to states and community colleges and high schools who are more in tune with local labor conditions. Secondly, it brings more transparency to the way that these dollars are spent to make sure that they're not wasted. Third, and this is actually revolutionary in Washington, D.C., we are mandating that if any CTE dollars are spent, they must be done in conjunction with local employers. This is very important because the skills that we teach our young people, as well as people in career transition, have to be in demand. This is very, very important. And fourth, it authorizes more money to be spent on CTE nationally over the next 7 years. I'm pleased to report that both our committee as well as the full House passed this bill unanimously. Thank you. Feel free to interrupt anytime. As you probably realize, a unanimous passage, indeed, a bipartisan passage of significant legislation hardly ever happens in Washington, D.C. anymore. And yet it happened in this case. It's a rare example in the current Congress of Republicans and Democrats working together for something that will benefit millions of Americans in every part of our country. I just want to point out one group of people before I move on. There's a group of apprentices from Aon who are at this table. Can you guys stand for a second? In a nutshell, my bill and the Thompson-Krishnamurthi Act basically would put their Aon's apprenticeship program on steroids because it's exactly the type of program that we need. Basically what Aon is doing is they have worked with local community colleges in inner city Chicago to help defray the cost of tuition for these young people, help them with paid internships while they're in school, and then at the conclusion of these programs, offer them another piece of paper called a job offer. And that is what all employers should be doing and indeed are doing across the country. And our bill would help to expand that, scale it up, make sure that that type of program grows. I'm very hopeful that the U.S. Senate will take up this legislation, which I believe is so critical for American workers and our economy. But being hopeful isn't enough. I'm also trying to work to make sure that the Senate passes this bill. When people ask me, how far would you go to see your bill pass? I can say, at least to Pennsylvania. And that's the truth. Here's the story behind that. As Congressman Thompson, my Republican co-sponsor, and I steered our bill through the House, we had the opportunity to get to know each other. Building these types of relationships between Republicans and Democrats makes it a whole heck of a lot easier to get things done. And it also broadens your perspective by reminding everybody how much we share in common. One of the things I coincidentally learned about Congressman Thompson is that he has family in my district. His son is a small businessman in Elgin, and his daughter-in-law is a minister there. And he has 2 grandchildren there. So he's been visiting my district for years, and I didn't even know it until we started working on this legislation together. So we decided that the next time he would visit them, and that was this past August, we would actually jointly promote this legislation. And it actually got some coverage. It seemed only natural that I return the favor. That's how, as many of you were visiting the beach or the lake last summer, I found myself in Pleasant Gap, an unincorporated community of fewer than 3,000 people in rural central Pennsylvania. It's a far cry from Chicago or Schaumburg, which is where I live. When you look up at the sky in Pleasant Gap, you see Nittany Mountain. When you do the same in Schaumburg, you see an airplane headed to O'Hare. Congressman Thompson invited me to meet with students at Central Pennsylvania Institute of Science and Technology to talk about how our bill could boost their efforts to obtain good-paying technical jobs. Although the students were different than the ones I meet at Harper Community College or Elgin Community College in my district, their objective was the same: to get the education and training to get access to the greatest social welfare program devised by human beings, a JOB, a job. Students in Pleasant Gap are embarking on a new training program in partnership with Caterpillar and Ariel to learn about diesel engines and how to fix them and how to repair them. Students in Schaumburg and across the Chicago suburbs are training workers for employment with our local employers, such as Zurich North America, or Aon, Motorola Solutions, and IBM. The students I met in Pleasant Gap share the same dreams as those I met across my district. They want an opportunity to learn what they need to find a job, support their family, and build a middle-class life. There's nothing partisan or political about that. It's simply the promise of America. And we ought to make that promise possible for every person ready to work for it, because at its core, that desire for a shot at the American dream is what our country is all about. And so that is what I'm doing at the national level to help with that dream. Now, let me talk about a local issue. The local issue I've been working on that's also bipartisan in nature is finally completing the Elgin-O'Hare Expressway to provide Western access to O'Hare. Right now, the Elgin-O'Hare neither reaches Elgin nor O'Hare. It's merely aspirationally named. The dream of building Western access to O'Hare has been languishing for decades, as you know, even though it has the support of nearly every local actor. Chicago and the suburbs, Republicans and Democrats, business and labor, and yes, Sox and Cubs fans. Now, just so folks in the city understand why this is so important and why it elicits applause from certain people in this room, for us in the west and northwest suburbs, you cannot go to O'Hare without going into the city, going east into the city, and then coming west to go to O'Hare, even though as the crow flies, O'Hare is literally right next to us. And so, why is this project so important beyond the mere fact of cutting our commute time, oftentimes significantly? In a word, jobs. Building a Western access road to O'Hare and giving Western access to O'Hare would create nearly 20,000 construction jobs, 7,400 in direct construction jobs, 3,000 engineering jobs, another 6,000 from vendors and equipment suppliers. And once the project is completed, our region would realize 65,000 permanent jobs, 44,000 in Cook and the balance in DuPage. It would result in an estimated $29 million in annual tax revenue and an additional $6 billion in regional economic output. Corporate headquarters and logistics companies, among others, would flock to the western suburbs to be in close proximity to the airport. You've seen the development in Rosemont on the eastern side. We believe the development, economic development, would be manifold on the western side. Now, why is a project with such massive benefits and universal support still waiting to be completed? The answer is literally up in the air. The Illinois Tollway Authority and the Canadian Pacific Railway have been engaged in a lengthy dispute about the rights-of-way above and below a rail track that lies along the western edge of O'Hare. Canadian Pacific argues that a bridge over the property and construction on the property would negatively impact its rail operations. Meanwhile, thousands of jobs, millions of dollars in economic activity, as well as the environmental benefits of less congestion on the roads around O'Hare remain twisting in the wind. So this past spring, I convened a public meeting of local officials, both Democrats and Republicans, to review the status of this project and strategize on how to push forward. Ultimately, we joined together in sending a letter to the U.S. Surface Transportation Board expressing our support of Western access to O'Hare, as well as completion of the Elgin-O'Hare Expressway. The dozens of signatories to the letter included local business and labor leaders, as well as local mayors and public officials from both sides of the aisle. And here I want to give special credit to DuPage County Chairman Dan Cronin, as well as the Tollway Chairman Bob Schillerstrom, who've been excellent allies and partners with me on this particular project. Shortly after receiving our letter, the board issued a directive to the Tollway and Canadian Pacific to enter into mediation. Negotiations which started in the spring are continuing, and I believe the results look very promising. All of us who live and work here should encourage a successful conclusion for good jobs and economic growth, a healthier environment, and a brighter future for the entire region for years to come. This is another example of bipartisanship in action. Cooperation, bipartisanship, focusing on results. These just aren't ideas. These are essential components of any effort to make a positive impact through government. That's the approach I've taken to national issues, such as with regard to the Thompson-Krishnamoorthi Act, as well as regional concerns like the Elgin-O'Hare Expressway. I believe this approach works. But I also know it's what I'm supposed to do as a newly elected member of Congress. Who knows? Maybe if we keep at it, Washington will finally get the message that I keep hearing at the almost 20 town halls that I've done and the various other public meetings we've had. Let's put partisanship aside. Let's start to meet our common challenges as Americans, and let's get something done. I'd like to close with my favorite saying, which is that yesterday is history, tomorrow's a mystery, but today is a gift. And that's why we call it the present. I'm so honored and blessed. I'm so honored and blessed to be with you here in the present to talk about our future challenges, but our future opportunities to work together to make America and our region a better place. So I say God bless you and your families. And of course, God bless the United States of America. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman. And we have time for a few questions. So if anybody has a question they'd like to ask, if you wrote it out on the blue form, just raise your hand and members of our staff will pick them up. Sam, I see there's some over here. And meanwhile, we have time for just a couple of questions here. This is from City Club member Michael Weiser. He's with the Commuter Car Corporation. He lives in Buffalo Grove. The best commuting option, given his work schedule, is to drive into Chicago every day. What's the best way to make self-driving cars a reality in Chicagoland? Interesting question.
Interesting question indeed. So I am now co-chair of the New Economy Task Force for the Democrats. And this is a question that we're confronting right now, which is driverless cars, automation, the artificial intelligence that these cars are going to have to use. And I know that in certain states, they are far ahead in terms of creating a regulatory regime that would accommodate driverless vehicles. We are a little bit behind here in Illinois, and this is something obviously that I think Springfield will be confronting in the near future, because I think this particular questioner echoes what a lot of people are thinking, and you know, it's going to be a brave new world when those arrive on our highways. I happen to believe that they will be a good thing in terms of helping with safety, as well as those of us who do sit in our cars for long periods of time and would like to be productive doing other things as well. But I do think that this is going to come down the pike pretty soon in Springfield.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to handle as many of these as we can. Philip Hale from Loyola University. How do you feel about the Prosper Act, recently introduced by your colleagues on education and workforce?
I know where this is coming from. I think that this is something that I'm not 100% thrilled with all the bills that come out of our committee these days. Although the CTE bill was done in a bipartisan manner, a lot of these other bills have not. I'd like to have more of a role with regard to these bills. The next one that's coming down the pike is the Higher Education Act, Reauthorization Act. That's going to be a big deal for a lot of people, including Loyola and others. And we're desperately hoping that it can be done in a bipartisan manner, although right now it appears that it's going to be introduced on a partisan basis, and we'll see where we go from there.
Okay, this is from Bert Hoffman, City Club member. With the inevitable federal budget slashing from the new Republican budget debacle, where's the money for badly needed infrastructure necessities like upgrading the electrical grid, sewer and water and transit systems going to come from?
Bert, am I correct in assuming you're not thrilled about this Republican legislation? So it was my hope and desire that we would come out of the first few weeks of this particular year, back in January, with an infrastructure package. I was really, really hoping that the president would actually propose an infrastructure plan, and Congress on a bipartisan basis, I think, would have gotten behind it, depending on the funding sources. For instance, I'll just give you one potential funding source that a lot of people were, excited about, which are the profits that are sitting overseas that have not been repatriated, and that could have been used to fund an infrastructure bank, or that could have been used in other ways. Unfortunately, that money is now spoken for as part of this tax package. It was both spoken for in H.R. 1 as well as the Senate bill that passed last week. So we don't have that source of funding. Where the funding would come from to fund a $1 trillion infrastructure package, which the president has been talking about, I'm not sure. But I still remain hopeful that we can talk about this in the coming year, but we're just running out of time. I'll just be honest with you. We're running out of time, and unfortunately, this particular bill, this legislation with the tax bill, it's caused some ill will, along with the repeated attempts to repeal Obamacare, that I'm not sure when and how we're going to come together on infrastructure, although it's direly needed. And so I'm hoping that perhaps cooler heads will prevail and we may be able to come up with something.
Okay. This is from Senator Castro. Have you had the opportunity to read the tax cut bill? What surprises have you found?
I have not, because I don't know if you saw some of the images of the tax bill that came out of the Senate. There's actually handwritten edits in the margins of what came out. And so it kind of looked like my City Club speech today. I think I'm the only one that could read this. And it's too bad. There's a rush. There's this fevered rush to get this tax bill through. You didn't ask me about it, but I'll tell you what I think about it anyway. I really think it's a bad bill for at least two reasons. One, it's the first time in my memory that we would actually have a tax bill that statutorily authorizes an increase in our national debt, in this case by $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. I think that's a horrible idea. We already have $20 trillion in debt. See, I was a small businessman before I came to Congress. I ran a small company. We make and sell infrared night vision military technology and solar cell technology. And I know that you cannot fund tax cuts by adding to your debt. It would be like me going to Priya and saying, hey, honey, I got a raise. I just charged our credit card to the max. Is that okay with you? And I think the answer would be no. And I think the answer should be no to a similarly funded tax bill in Congress. The second reason why I'm against it and why I voted against H.R. 1 is that it actually raises taxes for a lot of middle-class families. If you earn less than $75,000, the Tax Policy Center, which is a nonpartisan think tank, a lot of people respect this group in Washington, has calculated that your taxes are going to go up over the next 10 years. These are people who can barely afford to get by with their $75,000 or less today. You know, their wages and salaries have flatlined. Their staple expenses are going through the roof on health care, education, child care, you name it. And now you're going to add to their tax bill? That doesn't make any sense. So, yes, I ran a company. Yes, I think that the corporate tax rate is too high at 35%, but this is not the way to reform our tax laws.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. One last question. Okay, we have time for one last question before we do our drawing in that. This is kind of a political question, as if the others weren't. Ashvin Ladd with Breakwater, City Club member. A longtime Indian American supporter of yours is now challenging you, making it perhaps the first congressional race featuring two Asian Indian opponents competing. How does that dynamic affect your re-election campaign? And can we dovetail that with the question that everybody who's a public office holder is asked, who's a Democrat? Are you supporting a candidate for governor?
I'll take the second question first. I'm not supporting a candidate in the Democratic primary. With regard to the first question, let me just tell you, I was actually born in India. I came here when I was 3 months old, and I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, with certain members of the audience here, including my chief of staff. And I now join 3 others in Congress who are Indian American. I have affectionately dubbed them and us the Samosa Caucus. It's very small right now, but I'm proud to say that Indian Americans, like many groups, are slowly entering the civic life and political life of the country. I knew that I was blazing a trail in my congressional district. I just didn't know it would be on the Republican side. And so I do have at least 2 challengers now, actually, who are Indian American on the Republican side. And, you know, this is a democracy, and they're exercising their democratic rights. And so we're going to have an interesting election coming up.
Okay, thank you very much, Raj.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Don't leave yet.